Hey, it's Mr. Cavallo. This is going to be unit number 9, lesson number 6 from eMath instruction for Algebra 1. It's going to go over the quadratic formula, and I know a little song for the quadratic formula. It's to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus a square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let me know if you have any questions.
All right, so again, the quadratic formula is right up here. It's x equals negative b plus or minus a square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we can solve quadratics by using that. We also know factoring, so if we want to factor this, trinomial factors into two binomials. We have an x here and an x here. We need two numbers that multiply to give us 12, excuse me, and subtract to give us 4. So 6 and 2 would work. 6 times 2 is 12, and 6 minus 2 is 4. We need the combination of the 6 and the 2 to create a negative 4, so minus 6 and a plus 2. Now we can do the same thing, or it says to solve, sorry. So then we take each of those factors, set it equal to 0, and then solve those. So our two solutions would be x equals 6 and x equals negative 2. Using the quadratic formula, in this one, the a would be 1. It's the coefficient in front of the x squared. The b would be negative 4. It's the coefficient in front of the x term. And then the c is the constant, which in this case is negative or minus 12. So if we have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, I'm going to substitute in these three values for a, b, and c. So negative b would be negative negative 4, which is 4. B squared would be negative 4 times negative 4, which is 16. 4 times, so then minus 4 times 1 is 4. And then 4 times 12 is 48, but it's a negative 12, so it's a negative 48. So we'd have minus negative 48, which is just plus 48. All over 2 times a, which is 1. So I'm going to simplify a few things. 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 48 is 64 all over 2. So we can get the same answers as we got by factoring if we do 4 plus square root of 64 divided by 2 and 4 minus square root of 64 divided by 2. All right, so the square root of 64 is 8, so we'd have 4 plus 8, that's 12, divided by 2 is 6. 4 minus 8 is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2, so you get the same answers. It looks like a lot more, which it is when you can factor it, but when you can't factor it, it comes in quite handy. So number 2, it's asking us to complete the square. So x squared plus 6x plus 3 equals 0. So x squared plus 6x, I'm going to leave a little space, plus 3 equals 0. So actually, I don't need parentheses there. To complete the square, the kind of algorithm that we can use is we can take the coefficient next to the x, split it in half. So half of 6 is 3, and then square that number, which is 9. So if we add 9 to this part, now I'm going to put in parentheses, to this part here, to keep things equal, I'm going to put a, let me move this down just a little. To keep things equal, I put a plus 9 here, so I'm going to have to put a minus 9 here, and I still have a plus 3 equals 0. So I actually have this in the parentheses can now become x plus 3 squared. Minus 9 plus 3 is minus 6 equals 0. And then to solve this, we're going to do x plus 3 squared is equal to 6. I added 6 to both sides. I'm going to take the square root. X plus 3 is equal to the square root of 6, and I should do plus or minus. So if I subtract 3, I'm going to get plus or minus the square root of 6 minus 3. So my two answers would be the square root of 6 minus 3. I'm on my calculator. Negative, it says in simplest radical form. I missed that part. So that would actually be it then. Missed that simplest radical form part. So yeah, plus or minus 6, the square root of 6 minus 3. Another way you could write that is you could put negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 6. Okay, that 3 has to be negative. All right, using the quadratic formula, the A is 1, the B is 6, and the C is 3. So x equals negative b, so that'd be negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3, all over 2 times a, which is 1. So I'm going to simplify now. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 4 times 1 times 3 is 12, all over 2. Simplifying more, negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 12 is 24 over 2. Simplifying more, negative 6 plus or minus. Now 24 in simplest radical form would be 2 radical 6 all over 2. And then finally, if we divide the negative 6 and the 2 by 2, we end up with negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 6. The 2's would cancel out. We get the same exact thing. All right, we're going to factor to solve it first. So 2x squared minus 13x plus 20 equals 0. Now, because the lead coefficient isn't 1, it gets a little trickier. So I need two numbers that multiply to give me 20. And then we need to somehow combine those to make 13 or minus 13 for the middle term. So let's see, if I use 5 and 4, would that work? 10? No. How about 10 and 2? No. 20 and 1? No. Let me try the 5 and the 4 again. Yeah, I think it's, we're going to have the 5 here and the 4 here. There we go. So a little guess and check there. Both of these are going to be minuses. Now, how I did that just in my head, I was kind of doing 2 times 4 is 8, and then 5 times 1 is 5. 8 and 5 make 13, and then I figured out the minuses by looking at the sign of the middle term of the trinomial. In any case, so I'm going to set each of these equal to 0. So one answer is going to be 5 halves, or 2.5. The other answer is going to be 4. So if we use a quadratic formula, we should get the exact same thing. So the a in this case is 2, the b is negative 13, and the c is 20. So x equals negative 13 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 13 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 20. all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. All right, here we go. Simplifying. Negative 13 is 13. Negative 13 squared is 169. Minus 4 times 2 times 20, that's 160. All over 4. So x equals 13 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 4. So one answer is going to be 13 plus the square root of 9 over 4. And the other answer is going to be 13 minus the square root of 9 over 4. So square root of 9 is 3, so 13 plus 3 is 16, divided by 4 is 4. 13 minus 3 is 10, and 10 divided by 4, if you reduce it, is 5 over 2, or 2.5. Same answers. All right, number 4. If the quadratic formula is used to solve that, the correct roots are, so notice that they are in simplest radical form. I'll show you how you can do a little calculator at the end here. In any case, the A is 1, the B, watch out for that negative, it's a negative 4, and so is the C, it's a negative 41. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of the B, come on, negative 4 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is negative 41. Negative. All over 2 times A. Let's simplify. Negative 4 is 4, plus or minus. Negative 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 41 is positive, so plus 164, all over 2. X equals 4 plus or minus 16 plus 164 is 180, so the square root of 180 all over 2. Now we could continue to right, so what we can do here is we can take this and plug it into our calculator and then test it against the choices that we're given. So here's what I'm talking about. We got, let's do 4 plus the square root of 180. I'm going to get an answer, and then I got to divide that by 2. So let's test to see which choice also gives us 8.708. So 4, I'm going to do the plus part first. So 4 plus 3 radical 10. 4 plus 3 radical 10. I don't get that, so I don't think it's going to be choice number 1. Choice number 2 is 2 plus 3 radical 5. 2 plus 3 radical 5. Hey, there's that 8.708. So let's check the minus part. So now let's do 4 minus square root 180 and then divide that by 2. So let's see if 2 minus 3 root 5 also gives us that answer. Hey, it does. So that means it's got to be choice 2. So, if it's multiple choice, you don't necessarily have to put it in simplest radical form. You can, but you don't have to. Right, now before we move on, I want to go over something called the vertex form. In general, it's this right here, this a, and then in parentheses, x minus h squared plus k. The turning point would be, or the vertex, the turning point would be the x term of the turning point would be this h, I guess, and k would be the y coordinate of the turning point. So, for example, the turning point of this parabola here would be, now because it's a minus in the equation, this plus 5 actually means the turning point has a x coordinate of negative 5. And then even though this -1 here is still a -1. So if you take a look in the formula, it's a minus h, so a minus a -5 turns into +5, so that's why this part is negative. Over here, the turning point would be 1, 5. Now sometimes you have to complete the square in order to um, be able to write it in vertex form, so here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to take half of 8, which is 4, and then square that. 4 squared is 16. Now because I'm putting a plus 16 inside the parentheses, I have to put a minus 16 on the outside. This becomes x plus 4 all squared, and then this part becomes -1, which means the vertex would be at -4, -1. If there's a lead coefficient, what I would do is factor it out. So 2x squared plus 10x, leave a little space, plus 43. I'm going to take half of 10, which is 5, and then square that, which is 25. Now, if you factor out a 2, you actually have to do the opposite of twice this. So I'm going to take 2 times 25, which is 50. So I actually added in 50. So out here, I'm going to subtract 50. So I have 2 times, and then this is actually x plus 5 squared. And then -50 plus 47 is -7 or -7, which means that the vertex is at -5, -7. You might say, well, what does this 2 do on the outside? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with a turning point. That's more of how the parabola opens up and how wide it is and things like that. It doesn't have anything to do with where it turns. So I did that so that we can do the next problem. It says find the zeros of this function in simplest radical form by using the quadratic equation. So a is 1, b, don't forget the negative, is -12, c is 31. So I'm going to skip a few steps here. It's -12, which is 12. -12 squared is 144. 4 times a is 4. Times 31 is 124. So -124. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. So we get 12 plus or minus 144 minus 124 is 20. So the square root of 20 over 2. So that's going to turn into, if we put 20 into simplest radical form, we'd have 12 plus or minus 2 radical 5 all over 2. And then 12 divided by 2 is 6. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So all in all, we have roots at 6 plus or minus radical 5. All right, write this function in vertex form by completing the square. Based on this, what are the coordinates of its turning point? Verify on the graph. So we're going to take x squared minus 12x, put it parentheses, leave a little space, plus 31. Half of minus 12 is minus 6. If you square that, it's plus 36 here, which means a minus 36 here. This turns into x minus 6 squared. Minus 36 plus 31 is minus 5. So the turning point should be at 6, -5, which 6, -5. Verified. And then the application. The flow of oil in a pipe in gallons per hour can be modeled using the function -t squared plus 20t plus 11. Graph the function on the axes provided. So it's going to look something like this. Now, I didn't use a calculator, but you can and verify that it's about right. Using the quadratic find to the nearest tenth of an hour the time when flow stops is 0. So we need negative 2t squared plus 20t plus 11 to equal 0. So A is negative 2, B is 20, and C is 11. So x is going to be negative 20 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 400, minus 4 times a, which is negative 2. So negative 8 times c, which is 11. So that's negative 88. So it's minus negative 88, which is same as plus 88, all over 2 times negative 2, which is negative 4. All right. From here, I'm just going to type it into the calculator. So negative 20, I'm going to do plus the square root of 400 plus 88. Might as well make that 488. And then divide that by negative 4. I get negative 0.522 or negative 0.523. Now we're talking about flow of oil in a pipe. Can't really have negative, x would be what, negative hours? So that's not going to happen because that's negative. Time. So now we got to do the negative 20 minus part. And again, on my calculator, so negative 20 minus square root 488 divide by negative 4. Oop. Divide by negative 4. And I get 10.5 because I think it said to the nearest tenth. And that one makes sense because we're talking about hours. So 10.5 hours. All right, use the process of completing the square to identify the vertex. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to factor out a negative 2. All right, to complete the square, I'm going to take half of minus 10, which is minus 5, and then square that, which is plus 25. So I'm putting in a 25 here, but I also have 2 of these. So I need to do 25 times 2, which is 50. So I added in 50. And it's also a negative here, so I almost essentially put in a negative 50. So out here I'm going to put in a positive 50. So negative 2, this would be t minus 5 squared, and then 50 plus 11 is 61. So the turning point is at 561. So the peak flow is 61 gallons per hour, and that would occur after 5 hours. Okay, hopefully this was a help. Let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully we'll see you soon.